You had me worried there when you said the German-speaking track. Even though I do have a German name, actually my German is very poor. I haven't been using it since 8th grade, which is a long time ago in school. So I will be continuing in English, and hopefully you can all follow what I'm saying. And by the way, I'm also honored to sort of be I think they call it the chairman of this track, meaning the only thing I will be doing is introducing the speakers apart from myself. So when you see me grab the microphone, it's basically just to introduce the next speaker. So that's about it. But for right now, I'm of course honored to introduce myself as the first speaker of this track. I'm Thomas Schnegelsberg. And I'm a part of the company called STENOCARE. What I'll be talking about today is the learnings that we've had from the Danish medical cannabis pilot program. And I'll actually be leveraging the experiences we've had from being a supplier in Denmark, but also being a supplier in other countries in Europe like Sweden and Ireland and soon also the UK. You might ask, so what's the point of learning and from the Danish pilot program? I think the experience that we've had is first and foremost that the health agencies are actually talking together across borders. They are looking for best practice from their sister organizations in other markets. And Denmark has been a country that was legalized back in 2018, and we've seen several health agencies visiting Denmark and learning from the model that we have, the regulation that we have, and also from the different suppliers that we have in our market. So this is why I'll sort of be using that. And of course, the whole point is to help you as different players and stakeholders in the industry sort of navigate what does Europe look like, what should we be expecting from both the market, but certainly also from the health industry as such. But let me first just introduce STENOCARE to sort of give you an idea of the background that I'm speaking from. So STENOCARE is a Danish company that I was founding together with a group of people back in 2017 at the time where the Danish parliament was about to legalize medical cannabis for the first time in Denmark. We're a public traded company on Nasdaq in Copenhagen, and we have also been licensed by the Danish medicine agencies to cultivate medical cannabis, to import and package and store and sell. So we have a number of different licenses to operate in the industry. When you listen to whatever I have to say today, please remember that our focus is purely on prescription-based products. So I don't get into any recreational stuff. I don't get into CBD novel type of products or hemp-based products. We have been focusing solely on oil products that are prescription-based in the markets that we serve. The way that we work in the different markets is we have two pillars. So we partly have a pillar that is all about sourcing finished products that are GMP compliant from our suppliers in Canada and Israel. And we also operate our own indoor cultivation facility in Denmark. And the point of sort of making an emphasis on indoor is that the Danish regulation in our mind require us to produce in what we could almost call lab type environments in order to meet the patient safety requirements that we have in the Danish market. Today we are serving both patients in Denmark with our oil products. We're actually the only company with products approved in the Danish market. We're also the only product approved in Sweden with oil products. And we've also just been entering the UK market over this summer. And we'll soon be in another 5 markets around Europe. So that's kind of just the quick introduction to sort of the background for the experience that I will be sharing with you this morning. If we look at coming to the conference, I had some reflections because I had the pleasure of speaking at the first medical cannabis conference in Stockholm, Sweden, 2 weeks ago. And we've also heard this morning the stigma around medical cannabis and how sort of both the public thinks about medical cannabis treatment, but also how doctors and other professionals. And this was actually the sort of impression that I had visiting the Swedish conference. And Bob Marley, he's an amazing musician. We've learned the hard way that means you start all over again with applying for an approval of that product. So you cannot change the strains without actually changing the whole approval process, which is a 12-month plus process for that product. So that's just an interesting point. So the only point that I missed from the learnings is, of course, apart from the fact that it's a moving target with regulation, there's a time to market of probably 2 years. So from an investor's point of view, there's a capital issue that you really carefully need to think about. So the learnings that we've had from Europe is, of course, it's still a very attractive industry that we're looking at. But the hype that we saw probably 3 or 4 years ago, that it was gonna explode and you'll have the hockey stick effect on sales, really didn't happen. It will happen, we're pretty sure about that, because we're still nowhere near the full legalization of the union. Right now we are at 60% of the 740 million people living in Europe, so still a long way to go. But we also see a very strong value chain developing. So the ecosystem of different elements in the value chain of bringing products to market is growing, and that is a healthy sign as we see it for the industry. We also saw that because the market really didn't explode as everyone expected, the ability to be agile or nimble in your approach was really critical. Because let me use Ireland as an example, or UK is probably even better. The UK market legalized back in 2018-19, and then 4 years later, officially there's less than 3,000 patients being prescribed with medical cannabis. So a big market like that took that many years to reach 3,000 patients. Just tells you that if you then put in a huge capacity for your production facility, that will then serve 3,000 patients, assuming you have 100% of the market, is probably something where you need to be very careful. And therefore, the way that we, for example, went about doing this is that we started out very small, because even though we are a fairly small producer, we are still able to supply the whole market by ourselves. So again, being nimble and agile is the positive thing. Then I actually took out a slide that I used 4 years ago, which is all about the hype that we've seen in the market, the expectations for how many patients will be out there, the expectations of how much revenue will be generated in Europe. And it goes all the way from $3 billion all the way up to $148 billion in Europe alone, which is, of course, out of this world and really didn't happen the way. But what it actually did, it actually created some pretty unhealthy business cases in the different markets. We saw some tenders in Europe where, based on these huge expectations, we had companies that signed up for margins and volumes and so on, which sets the bar on where the industry can go next. So we are actually right now in a position where we need to rethink how to make the medical cannabis industry a healthy industry with a healthy dynamic. And I think we're seeing that happening slowly now. Of course, we also have the challenge that there's no harmonization. So each country will be a different story, a different process every single time. So it's really resource intensive to enter a new market and get a new product approved. And then the last point is something I've heard over the last year and a half, where the health authorities are starting to get a bit concerned with companies cutting corners, because all the regulation, all the red tape, all the long handling processing times to get licenses and get products approved, of course, there will be people trying to cut corners. An example that I've heard, for example, from the UK authorities, is that something that has been called greenwashing, and it's basically that some companies have been bringing in raw materials from markets where you could question the quality of how it's being produced. I'm being kind of very polite and diplomatic right now, but then they bring it into a country in Europe. They have someone process it, and then they put on a GMP stamp, and no one will ever know. The reality is that the authorities are very well aware of this, and they're looking at different ways to introduce regulation, because it's all about patient safety in their mind. And also, back to my point that if we want to be seen as a trustworthy industry, this is stuff that should not be happening, because the future of the industry is actually based on trustworthiness and our ability to act and deliver like any other pharmaceutical company in Europe. So that's kind of the key learnings from my side and from our side. We think that the future in Europe needs to be with a pharma mindset. We think it's still a very exciting market for us to be in, still very early days, but in the next 4 to 5 years, it'll grow as projected, probably not to $148 billion, but probably more in the neighborhood of $3.5 billion. So we think Europe will be an area where investors will be looking to invest versus where they are today in North America. So that's kind of the projections that we have for the future. And that concludes my presentation, and we are still on time. I know we're not going to have questions. So now I'm the chairman. So we won't have questions after each presentation. We'll end up summarizing each of the presentations and ask the presenters to sit on a panel, and then you can ask questions across all the different topics. So thank you very much for your attention so far.